Hello, everyone. We're about to start. Just going to give everyone a couple of seconds and then we will get started. Hi, everyone. I see some people joining on Instagram. Hey. Let's see. We have some people joining on Facebook as well. All right. Well, Hi. Hey, everyone. All right, well, I'm just going to jump right in. Hello, I'm Temi Shianbade, and this is Ask Temi Live, where we discuss the best ways to establish your business, protect your name, and keep your profits. I am really, I don't know if excited is the right word about just being here with everyone and joining the conversation with everyone. I think what it is not necessarily excited, but feeling pressed, feeling a weightiness about what we're talking about. And if you didn't see the title already, today I want us to have a candid conversation about business, economics, and justice. Has many of you been watching? I mean, if you're in this world, you know that the past few months have been crazy and chaotic, and especially recently, if you're in the United States, we've had so much tension that has arisen as a result of, simply put, and I'm going to be blunt, injustice. And I want to talk about that a little bit. But before I do, if you saw what I posted on Instagram or on Facebook earlier, I stated that when Philando Castile died in 2016, it changed my focus. And I really wanted to really unpack that for those of you who are watching today. So before I can tell you about how it changed my focus, I have to start off with where my focus was before. When I graduated from undergrad, I joined Teach for America, and I had the opportunity and privilege to teach 8th grade language arts in Alief, Texas, or Alief, which is a district in Houston, Texas. And if you are familiar with Teach for America, you'll know that Teach for America's goal is to try and close the achievement gap that we see that exists in our school systems. And so that was my first job out of college. It was seeing these inequities, up close and personal, and seeing my students growing up in neighborhoods that were economically at a disadvantage, right? And so that's where I started. And when I taught my students in Alief, and I specifically taught at Ali Middle School, it wasn't a diverse community in the sense that there weren't white people. It was just blacks and Hispanics. And that was very similar to my upbringing in Providence, Rhode Island. Many people who hear about Rhode Island think about how, Rhode Island is, Newport and beaches. But if you grew up in the urban area of Rhode Island, and specifically Providence, that wasn't necessarily the case. But in Rhode Island, one of the things I loved is that we had different types of Hispanics and different types of black people, and I felt like I really got to embrace and see what true diversity was. Now, when I started teaching, it was a low-income neighborhood, and so many of the factors that impacted my students was poverty. And it wasn't uncommon to also have students who had family members who were going through the criminal justice system. I have one day specifically that sticks out in my mind, and I share this story often, was a day that I had my students after school in the classroom, and there was one young lady who had her notebook opened up. And so it was during dismissal, so I like to chat with my students at the end. And I looked over and I said, "Oh, what's that? What's in there?" And she said, "It's a letter to my uncle." And I was like, "Oh, where is your uncle?" And I thought she was going to say, maybe he had traveled somewhere. But no, he was locked up. He was incarcerated. And it started this conversation with my students. And it was like a handful of students who were left. But all of them had relatives who were locked up in some form or fashion. And so for me, a light bulb went off. I said, my students are dealing with this poverty, but poverty is impacting all these other areas of their lives. I also had students who were facing homelessness, who were facing, just trying to eat. Most of my students were also on low and reduced food, so they got their food when they came to school. And again, I wasn't unfamiliar with the system because there were similarities in the way I was similarities in my upbringing, but as an adult, as a teacher, seeing those disparities up front caused me to grow restless. And when I grow restless, I start thinking about what can I do. And so part of my motivation when I left teaching was to figure out what structures were impacting my students when I was in the classroom. I wanted to go to the system that I felt impacted them and forced teachers to become miracle workers, essentially. And so with my students, I found that when I left law school, or when I started law school, that was my goal. I wanted to join HUD, for example, Housing and Urban Development, to try and see what I could do to really impact my students' lives. While I was in law school, I had the opportunity to intern with the Public Defender's Office, the Harris County one, and it was recently opened. I think it was like 2 or 3 years old at that time. And that experience was just, I think it was life-changing, because when I graduated from law school, my biggest desire was to become a criminal defense attorney. I wanted to work for the Public Defender's Office, or I wanted to open up my own practice, and that's essentially what I did. So when you all have seen me, in this business realm, that's not actually how I started. I started from a criminal defense perspective. And so, sorry, I think we're having some technical issues. But I'm just going to keep going. So when I started as a criminal defense attorney, I loved it. I joined Gideon's Promise. The Harris County Public Defender's Office is amazing. And so I had all of these resources that really empowered me to try and combat injustice. But then Philando Castile died. And it was like similar to the current situation that we're in right now, where it was a string of instances where black men were being killed and black people were being killed by the hands of the police. And I remember Philando Castile specifically because I remember feeling heartbroken. I remember calling my brother in tears, just distraught, because I was heartbroken. I could see my family members in this particular man. I think it was something about the fact that he was with his kids, with his family members, that just made me, that just shook me differently. And so I remember calling my brother the day after Philando Castile died, in tears. But then the other thing I remember is I remember going to work. I remember getting dressed, wiping my tears, and going to the criminal justice courthouse. I believe it was in Fort Bend County that day, because that's where most of my criminal defense work was. And when I walked into the courtroom and I walked through the doors, I looked around and I saw the system at work. And I could not unsee it. What I mean is, at that time, I looked around and I realized that the people who were in the courtroom at that time, the criminal courtroom or during the criminal docket, were all people of color. And for the most part, it didn't look like it was the richest people in the world. To be frank, I know the clients that I had, most of my clients were indigent. And the people who even retained me, they also were not at the highest economic status, because our criminal justice system wasn't built for that. And so what I remember specifically about that time was remembering that there had been protests. And there had been people who were upset about the senseless killings of black people before. Yet the system continued. Yet I was there at work, just like I was before. And when this happened, something shifted for me on the inside. I knew that I had to address economic disparities. And so I had already started doing some business work, but because I loved criminal defense so much, there was something that kind of made me hesitant to let go of that or to start to switch gears. But when Philando Castile died, I realized that we had to address the economic problem. And so that's what got me to becoming the business lawyer that you all see today. The reason why I work with small businesses is because I believe that small businesses and, emerging businesses can impact our communities. I believe that when we harness the power, our collective power economically, that change can actually come. Right now, I love the protest and I love the reform that I see that's happening. And I love that we have new things being instituted from a criminal justice standpoint. And we have police reform that's being proposed. But what happens when the protests stop? And even when, criminal justice reform occurs? We'll still have the economic disparities there if we don't figure out ways to economically support our communities. And I'm specifically talking about black communities. I'm specifically talking about minority communities and figuring out ways to have this Yes. And figuring out ways to have this shift for our different communities. Ultimately, I strongly believe, and this is a quote that I got from someone else, Paul Brunson, I believe, and he says that political power follows economic power. And I strongly believe that. I strongly agree with that. And it's something that I just want to encourage other people to recognize. I also want us to recognize what happens when we are economically disadvantaged. It's not just that you don't have enough money to make it week to week. We have situations like what we're facing with COVID-19, where people are not able to get adequate health care. We have situations where people are growing up in broken homes because families that have economic distress are more likely to be broken up. When we have people who are, marriages that are breaking up, a lot of the one of the main reasons that's cited is finances, right? So if you're at an economic disadvantage, that increases the likelihood and the chances that your business or your family is going to suffer some type of brokenness. And so I want us to start thinking about how can we economically support our community. If you're someone who's an entrepreneur, who's interested in figuring out ways to start your business, I want to tell you that I'm all here for it, and I'm here to tell you that you have support and that your business and that your work matters. If you're not an entrepreneur, I want to encourage you to use your money to speak. I want to encourage you to support more Black businesses. Now, I'm not saying that you leave all the other businesses behind. That's not what I'm calling for. But I am asking for us to start making intentional decisions about how we spend our money so that we can impact our communities. If you are a business owner, one of the things that I want to encourage you is that as you focus on providing excellent service and excellent products and building your economic stability, you are freeing yourself up to provide more resources for your communities. I know that a lot of people, including myself, we felt very, at least if I'm speaking for myself, I felt very uncertain about, okay, how do I continue to run my business during these really difficult economic times? Like, how do I continue to charge people for legal services? And how do I continue to do this? How do I launch new services? But ultimately, if I want to be empowered to make a difference, my economics have to matter. I have to go out there, and I encourage you to do the same. And I encourage all of us to have grace for each other and recognize that we're trying to build our communities. And so it's just critical. I am also a believer, and so it's not just about the economics for me, in the sense that there's a scripture that comes to mind, and it says that where your treasures are, there your heart will be also. And so a lot of times when we're talking about these things, the question is, how is our money speaking? The Bible, which is the book that I reference, talks about being a good steward of the resources that you have. And I believe for the Black community in particular, this is a time for us to heal ourselves and heal our people. There's another story that comes to mind for me is the story of Nehemiah in the Bible, right? So, and I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. I told you this would be candid. This is just me being me. But Nehemiah is this character who's part of he works for the king, so he works in government. And he hears that there is issues in his hometown. He hears that their walls are down and that people are distressed and that people are discouraged and that people are in despair. And so when Nehemiah hears all these stories, it weighs down on him the way it weighs down on us. But when he goes back to his community and he starts to say, hey, we need to rebuild the walls, one thing that they do is they all focus on their part of the wall. They focus on their area of influence. They focus on their area of strength. And so I'm encouraging each of us to build up the wall that's in front of us. Whatever your industry is, I want you to pursue excellence in that. If possible, if you have that desire, go ahead and pursue entrepreneurship in that area. Don't hold back, because when we do that, when we take the time to focus on what we need and heal our land and build our walls, when we do all of that, that's when we're able to see the progress that we desire for our communities. And so again, I just want to encourage you, if you're an entrepreneur or a would-be entrepreneur and you're holding yourself back, don't hold back anymore. Our community needs people to go ahead and take risk. We need more resources. We need more options. We need people who are encouraging and pushing the envelope and encouraging excellence in everything that we do. We need people to go ahead and be business owners. We need people to address the economic disparities. And we need people to use their financial tools to seek justice, to seek political power so that we can influence and help our community. And this isn't necessarily just for Black people. It's also for people who say that they're allies, for people who say they want to support. These are ways that you can support. I saw one example that completely blew my mind, and it was the founder of Reddit. He stepped down from his position of power to allow and he's encouraging his company to find a Black person to fill that spot. What he's doing there is he's allowing space for power to be transferred to somebody who you typically wouldn't have power, and also providing economic support as well. Because when you give someone a job, you're giving them a means to feed themselves and their community. I know I've gone off on a tangent, and I really don't know what's going on with my Facebook because I have some technical issues. So I don't know if I'm going to do this again and if it was just Instagram, but I really want everyone again to know that I'm encouraging you. Now, one other thing that I wanted to let you know is about the resources that we have available at the law office of Temi Shiambade along these lines. For years, I've been thinking about, doing a subscription service to help people who are starting off, who may not need ongoing, like an ongoing general counsel that's super expensive, but you need some type of education, some type of support to kind of help you figure out and navigate the path. Well, we've created something. If you go to www.toslegal.com/tap, and TAP is spelled TAP, you're going to find the Access Project. Now, the Access Project has been in the works for years, and I actually intended on launching it about 2 or 3 weeks ago, before all of this started, and then the weight of just seeing another person or seeing another set of Black people killed just kind of slowed me down and threw me off for a second. But I want you to know that if this is something that can help you, the Access Project is designed to create ongoing access to resources and to information to really help you build your business. The last couple of weeks, I've had a lot of people asking me what they can do to kind of support the cause and also people who are trying to become more entrepreneurial. And they've been asking me questions about starting their businesses and about whether they should go with an LLC or an S Corp, whether they should trademark their name, how do they get funding, all these different questions about how to start their business. Well, I want to join and group all of those people together. I want us to have, weekly or bi-weekly webinars where we're discussing that. I want to provide checklists and resources, and then access to me on a regular basis, strategy sessions, different things that can help you be economically and legally sound in your business. So if that's something that you're interested in, please feel free to go to www.toslegal.com/tap. That's where you'll find these resources. That's where you'll find information about this specific program. And so again, we're going to be talking about trademarks. I'm hoping to bring different experts in to come in and join us on those conversations and really build a community of people who are trying to, build their businesses the right way. If you've followed me for a while, you know that I'm really passionate about that. I consistently have my Start Right conference. Didn't have it at the beginning of this year because I had some personal things that were going on. But even those personal aspects that I'm not going to necessarily go about, I'm not going to go into details, but the passing of my father, those tie back to this exact thing that I'm talking about. Ultimately, my goal is to help small business owners become leaders in their communities and people who have influence, economic influence, to bring sustainable change. And so if you're on that path and you need a little bit of guidance, you don't need to have $1 million to participate, but the Access Project was created for you. If you want more information about that, or if you want to sign up, you go to www.toslegal.com/tap. So I've been going and talking for a while. I want to know if there are any questions. I'm looking on Instagram. I see some people say, lawyers are annually at the bottom of most respected and trusted profession. Oh, thanks, person, whoever said that. But we're working on making sure that we're not considered untrustworthy. We're trying to encourage people to start their businesses. I see someone who said they love everything that we're saying. I'm so glad that you said that. And we also have computer issues. My computer decided to freeze. So that being said, if you're on Facebook,